Hail Caesar. What's more, I am an executioner, and I'm good at what I do. Abel! Where's my drink? Abel, your tavern serves the worst food in all of Jerusalem. I don't even know why I come here. Abel, bring me some food, and be quick about it. Four years. 4 long years. Here in Jerusalem, of all places. How I long for Rome. The Colosseum. The games. The Roman bathhouses. Egyptian beer. Her teeming legions of Roman soldiers. Oh, let's go to Galilee, Tertius says. We'll enjoy the coastal town, the cool evenings, the pretty Jewish girls. Tertius would not know a beautiful woman if the gods dropped an entire harem right on his head. This town stinks. The problem with this town is that there are only about 300 acres within the walls of Jerusalem. And within that 300 acres, you have almost 100,000 Jews living. Once you make way for the fortress of Antonia, that's where I work, King Herod's palace, the estate of the high priest, well, you get the idea. On the eastern half of the city, there are 100,000 poor, smelly Jews stacked one on top of another. My first day here, I got lost in that pathetic excuse they have for a market. I've never seen such a mess. The streets of the city are narrow, the store fronts are open. When you walk by, it's crowded with animals and donkey-dung. There's always a shop owner coming out, dragging on your clothes, trying to get you into buying some junk. Wine merchants, jewelers, butchers, bakers, sailors, slaves, couriers. I got so turned around I didn't know which way Rome was anymore. But the market's not the worst of it. On any given day, this city will be flooded with 150,000 pilgrims. The Jews, they get drunk on religion. I prefer the real stuff. Abel, bring me more wine! This religion of theirs, this stern, overbearing religion, where the smallest detail of life is ordered and you're commanded. I mean, they have all these rules and laws and holy days and then more holy days and then Sabbath days and days where you can't work, and there's all these ceremonial washings and all these rules and places where you can't even walk more than 2/3 of a mile from your house on the Sabbath day. And then there's this gaudy temple. It should belong in Rome. They say that they keep God in the temple. In a golden box, they say. Abel, maybe you should let this God out of his box a little more so we can get a look at him from time to time. What kind of a God allows his people to be conquered by a nation like Rome? Rome is a bear with iron teeth. Four long years in Jerusalem. It's really just an outpost of the Roman Empire. The flags of Tiberius Caesar, they snap smartly in the wind, from North Africa to Hispania. And yet I am in Palestine. Do you know how many men I have killed in 4 years? Let me show you the tools of my trade. This is the executioner's hammer. The hammer, I will pound in these nails. 3 nails for every condemned man. 3 nails for every prisoner. The Roman sword. Made from the finest steel to be found in all the empire. There's my spear. I keep its tip sharp enough to shave the whiskers off of a priest in 30 paces. This is my cat of 9 tails. This is not just a whip. What we do is we embed tiny pieces of metal in each one of the whips, 9 whips in all. So that when a Roman soldier strikes the back of a prisoner, these tiny pieces of metal will embed themselves into the flesh. When I strike a prisoner with my cat of 9 tails, the 9 tails stick to the prisoner's back. And then you rip the cat of 9 tails crossways across the flesh to leave a laceration with every lash. 40 lashes with the cat of 9 tails, no prisoner will ever be the same. On this, I got this yesterday. I want it cast in lots. My centurion said that it was seamless. That's interesting. Kind of reminds me of him. A perfect garment. Most people don't understand the way the crucifixion works. You see, in crucifixion, you don't die of your wounds. In crucifixion, there are 2 beams. There's the vertical beam, which stays in the ground all the time. It gets used over and over again. We make the beams of cypress. And then there's the cross beam. The cross beam has a mortise joint in it that fits to the vertical beam. And when a man is condemned to die, we'll place the cross beam on his back. Over the right shoulder, we'll tie his hands so that his hands loop over the beam. And he has to carry his own beam to the place of the crucifixion. I would usually assign 4 soldiers to each prisoner because of the resistance of the prisoner, because they know what's about to come. The soldiers will lay the prisoner on his back, stretch his arms out across the crossbeam. It will take a soldier to hold down each arm. The soldier will then take his knee, and he will place his knee in the hollow of the elbow to hold the hand steady for me. I will come, and I will hold 2 nails in my left hand. I will hold 2 nails in my teeth, 1 nail in my left hand, and the hammer in my right hand. And with the nail tip, I will find the little hollow spot in the wrist. It's about here. It's important not to puncture veins or arteries because we don't want them to die of the loss of blood too soon. Then I will bring the hammer high, and I'll bring it down swiftly. On a good day, I'll set the nail in a single blow. 2 or 3 more strikes, and I have the nail where I want it. Then, I hop over the body, I take the second nail out of my teeth, and I set the second nail. When I'm satisfied that both nails are set in a way that the prisoner cannot wiggle forward and fall off the cross, then I will stand up and I will raise both hands. This is my signal for the soldiers to grab the crossbeam and stand the prisoner up, and then lift the prisoner with all of his weight bearing down on those two wounds to lift the prisoner completely off the ground. He will then carry that crossbeam over and set it on the vertical beam, on the joint that's prepared for it. The prisoner is now suspended on the cross by 2 points, and his feet will be dangling off the ground. Then comes the next part, which is the hardest. You have to nail the feet. You would think that the prisoner would resist, but usually they are in so much pain that when we grab the feet and lift up just a little bit, it relieves some of the pressure from the wounds, and so they allow us to do our work without protest. It's important to bend the knees and to lift the feet up the stake, because if the feet are stretched out too far, then the condemned will die too quickly. And that defeats the whole purpose of crucifixion. Usually I'll nail the right foot over the left one, raise the feet about 10 or 12 inches up the stake, and set the third and final nail. Crucifixion was designed by the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were creative about how they executed criminals. They tried execution by strangulation, by impalement, by drowning, by boiling in oil. But what was needed was a new way to execute prisoners that would make the torment last, that would make them die slowly and painfully. And so they developed crucifixion. You see, what happens is the condemned is now held on these 3 points. And the pain in his feet will be so bad that he will try to bend his knees and slide down the cross, which puts his arms in a V position, transferring all of the weight to his hands. When this happens, there will be 2 things. Number 1, the weight in his hands will be too great to bear. Number 2, the pectoral muscles become paralyzed, which allows the prisoner to inhale but not exhale. This induces an involuntary panic. And so after a few moments, the prisoner must then stand up on the single nail that holds the feet. He will stand up enough to bring his shoulders level to his hands. That's when he can grab a few quick breaths of air. Usually it's like, but the pain in his hands is too great. The pain in his feet are too great because he's transferred all of the weight to the top of those wounds. And then he will collapse once again to transfer the weight back to his hands, but then he can't breathe. That's why it usually takes about 48 hours to die. You see, in crucifixion, if we do it right, you don't die of your wounds. You die of asphyxiation. When you become too exhausted to push yourself up momentarily to get a breath, you will slide down the cross for the final time, and you will die of asphyxiation. It usually takes about 48 hours. Once we have the prisoner in place, our work is mostly done. We enjoy rations, cheap wine. We set up a sentry detail. And we simply have to wait for the condemned to die. Make sure that he doesn't wiggle his way off the cross, or their family and friends don't come and free him. It's my job. That's what I do for a living. I've always enjoyed my work. We did 3 yesterday. That's where that came from. I wanted casting lots. It all started about the 3rd watch of the night. I was asleep in the barracks in the fortress of Antonia, sleeping off a drunk, when Tertius came busting into the barracks. We've been called on the detail, we've been called on the detail. Domitius, get up, they're waiting for us at the praetorium. Always a crisis with Tertius. I was in no mood to be trifled with, so I got up and got dressed. It's unusual to be holding trial at night. On the way to the praetorium, Tertius said something about sedition. He said something about traitor. Oh, it's to be expected. It's the Passover week. It's their holiest week of the year. The Jews are always trying to riot, trying to throw off the yoke of the Roman Empire. These people hate us. No matter what we do for them, they hate us. Because what they long for most is freedom. And freedom is the one thing that Rome cannot grant. So we walk into the praetorium, and there's this trial going on. And I'm expecting to see one Jew and a bunch of Romans, because it's sedition, it's treason. And when I got there, what I saw is I saw a bunch of priests all gathered around Pilate, and they were screaming, and they were yelling, and they were waving their hands, and they were arguing about sedition, and about treason, and about loyalty to Caesar. Something just didn't feel right. The priests arguing about sedition. These are the people that hate us. These are the people that are always rioting and trying to get away from Rome. But taking up for old Tiberius they were. My curiosity was piqued. So I forced my way through the crowd. And I saw him. The first time I saw him, he was just standing there with his hands tied behind his back. And he had his head down. I walked right up to him to get a good look at him. And what I noticed was that he looked sad, but he didn't look scared. That's odd. And the priests they're just railing, and they're yelling, and they're arguing, they're calling out threats against Pilate. And this whole time, he never interrupted them. He never spoke in his own defense. He never defended himself. That's different. The priest began calling these witnesses. And it was obvious that they had been paid. Some said one thing, some said another. They all contradicted themselves. Pilate was getting visibly frustrated. It was the middle of the night. He really was in no mood to trifle with prisoners. I don't know why he allowed it to go on. And as they were arguing, one of them said something about he's from Galilee, and Pilate seized on the opportunity. He said, well, if he's from Galilee, he's under King Herod's jurisdiction. Send him to Herod. Great, I thought. We've got to walk all the way across town in the middle of the night. So we formed the detail. We took the prisoner to Herod. At first, it seemed like Herod was a little bit scared of him. I got the feeling they'd never met before. And then Herod grew a little bolder. Some people were telling some story about him killing one of the man's family members or something. Herod began this long interview. Asked him all kinds of questions. Kept talking about miracles and healing people. Some man who had come back from the dead just a week or two before. The prisoner never responded. And the longer Herod interviewed, the longer he asked questions, and the longer that he was ignored, the more angry Herod became. I think that he was embarrassed. He's the king. And this man won't even respond. Won't answer a question. Won't defend himself. He almost acted like he didn't know a bunch of people were trying to kill him. Finally, Herod is so angry, he says, "Don't you know that I have the power to kill you or the power to save your life? Now work one of your mighty miracles for me." And then Herod had a whole bunch of sick people brought in. Right there into his hall. A whole group of, he brought them in, he said, "Now, work one of the miracles I've been hearing about." I stood and watched in disbelief. The prisoner didn't respond. Herod finally became so angry. And the mob became so violent. And the priests had so lost their composure that Herod's bidding, some of my soldiers got a purple robe and they put it on Jesus. And they began to mock him. "Hail, King of the Jews!" Stupid Tertius. He went outside and he fashioned a crown of thorns. Put a big cut right down the middle of his thumb. I laughed. Finally, Herod tired of his little game. He sent the prisoner back to Pilate. Pilate was none too happy to see us coming back. This was not a problem that he was wanting to deal with. And so the interviews started again. This time Pilate took him off to the side and they had a private conversation. It seemed that Pilate's heart was starting to turn. Early in the morning, Pilate just wanted to dispense with the prisoner and be done with him. But he kept making inquiries to the charges, and the priests kept saying all this stuff about their law. They kept calling up all these witnesses that didn't make sense. And the more the night wore on, the more confusing it became. Pilate was getting visibly agitated. You see, we've never condemned a man like this before. There was something different about him. He had this almost kingly bearing about him. It's like he had the ability to rise above everything that was taking place there in the trial. In fact, he left me with the feeling that it would have been more fitting if he had passed judgment on us. Something began to stir down in my heart. This man was no rebel. I mean, the way the priest talked, you thought that he had an army ready to storm the gates of Rome and claim Tiberius' throne. He wasn't a traitor. There was no sedition. They kept talking about these miracles, how he was the Son of God. And I'm supposed to hang him on a cross for that? Pilate became very angry. And finally he stood up and he said, "I find no fault in this man." It was a stunning rebuke to the leaders of the city. Imagine the Jewish leaders, the rulers, the religious figures of the city, bringing this man into a heathen judge, saying, "He's worthy of death." And the heathen judge examines him and says, I find no fault in him. I find nothing worthy of death." It was a stinging rebuke. Oh, you should have seen the priests. Caiaphas just flushed red with anger. "We would not have brought him to you if he was not a criminal. This man is deserving of death. If you don't condemn him, you are no friend of Caesar." I looked at Tertius and shook my head. Something's wrong. The Jews of all people in here defending old Tiberius. Pilate said that he would have this man scourged and released. So I took my cat of nine tails. I think Pilate was anticipating that this would arouse the compassion of the crowd. He was wrong. He was so wrong. Once they tasted blood, it only whet their appetite for more. The sun was coming up in the eastern sky. More and more people were joining the crowd. Word was going out through all of Jerusalem that this man, they called him Jesus, that this man had been arrested and he was on trial, that there had been a secret nighttime trial before Pilate and the Jewish leaders. The crowd swelled until it just became this angry, vicious mob. The people were taking their cues from the leaders. Jesus standing there with his back lacerated, just dripping in this pool of blood. And Pilate walking around yelling how he finds no fault in the man. He finally tried to strike a bargain. He tried to barter a deal with him. He brought out this murderer that we just captured. His name's Barabbas. Barabbas has killed so many people. Pilate got the worst prisoner of all as his bargaining chip and said, "Who shall I release to you? Jesus of Nazareth or Barabbas?" And the crowd called out, "Barabbas, Barabbas." Pilate said, "What shall I do with Jesus?" And they said, "Crucify." Pilate said, "Why? What wrong has he done?" But his voice was just drowned out in the sea of shouts. They began to chant. The entire crowd settled into a rhythm, watching the priest's hands as they rocketed back and forth. "Crucify! Crucify! Crucify! Crucify!" They knew that Pilate was about to fold. And so yesterday, Rome and Jerusalem, as far apart as they could possibly be, two totally different worlds, joined hands and condemned an innocent man to die. And he was given over to us. I thought we would break him. He wouldn't cry before Pilate. He wouldn't call out before King Herod. He wouldn't beg for mercy before the Sanhedrin. He didn't even protest under my whip. But when we carried him to the place of crucifixion, he would break. He would beg for mercy. And so my men put that heavy 30-pound crossbeam across his shoulders. They brought two other prisoners up from the dungeon, robbers. And we began our route to the Cundiff gate. Because of the Jewish law, we can't crucify anyone within the walls of the city. Now, we usually take them on a circuitous route through the entire city, so that people can see what happens when you cross Rome. But the Jewish leaders, they were anxious to have this one killed. And because the Sabbath hours drew on, we walked them directly to the place of execution. It was only about 3,000 paces, but I was worried about Jesus. He was having trouble standing up all by himself, much less with a 30-pound crossbeam laid on his back. The centurion came in. He was mounted. He led the way. A large crowd of people that were following us. "Make way for the soldiers of Rome," he shouted. And we began to walk. As we did, this violent mob walked along with us. Some shouted loudly for innocence, others for guilt. We would walk by the little shops, and the shop owners would come out, and they would see us, and they would just yell these sympathetic words, "No, no!" The women would cover their heads, faces with their hands and their fingers. When we walked by the market, the people in the morning market, they must have seen the timbers sticking up off the shoulders of the condemned. And as they saw those three timbers bobbing in the middle of the crowd, the entire market came out and flooded us. Many people apparently knew this Jesus. Many people had witnessed his miracles and had heard him teach. Some shouted one thing, some shouted another. We were losing control. The poor centurion, he wanted everything to be orderly. But Jesus was establishing the pace because he was the slowest, weakest one. And he could barely put one foot in front of another. I had to call all of my men together. The three prisoners happened to now be protected in between a square of leveled spear tips. Every legionary had his spear out, sword drawn. Just then the centurion came riding back to tell Jesus that he must hurry. And just when he made it back to our position, Jesus stumbled a final time and he hit the ground hard with that timber and rolled over on his back. Muddied face, the hair matted in blood, the lacerations to his back. We all knew that it was useless to steady him up again. Just then, a foreigner began to curse under his breath. As the centurion pointed at him with his whip, he said, "You there, carry this man's timber." I took the crossbeam off of Jesus and helped him back to his feet. He leaned on me for the first few feet until we all began to walk again. Golgotha is a tiny little knoll. It's about 15 feet high. It's just about 50 feet outside of the Cundiff gates. When we got on top of the knoll, Jesus collapsed in exhaustion. There are preparations to be made. So they took the timbers off of the two robbers. The guards established a perimeter. Others laid out provisions for the day. I noticed this little group of women. There was a young boy standing in the midst of them. They were all weeping uncontrollably. One woman seemed particularly distraught. She kept holding her hands out toward Jesus. I would find out later that this was his mother. Can you imagine a mother watching us treat her son that way? When Jesus looked into her eyes, I saw that his face tried to form a smile. I swear that he seemed to be more concerned about her than the suffering he was about to endure. Just then, one of the guards grabbed Jesus and pulled him back onto his back, laid him out across the crossbeam. That was my signal for our work to begin. I remember that Jesus didn't cry out. He just groaned. when his head hit the ground and the crown of thorns embedded even more deeply into his flesh. My guard stretched his arms out. I took my nail, and I found the hollow spot in his wrist. And just before I came down on that nail and set the nail for the very first time, I looked in Jesus' face. He was watching me. But there was no hatred. There was no remorse. There was none of the usual begging for mercy. There was none of the usual vengeance for the Roman conqueror and the executioner. He just lay there without offering resistance. And he waited for me to do my work. Within moments, we had the three men erected on crosses. The clamor of the women was only matched by the clamor of the priests. By all the gods, I wish that they would leave him alone. You who rebuild the temple in 3 days, come down from the cross. Save yourself. You who are the Son of God. The high priest Caiaphas, he steps forward and he sneered. He said, you who help others, you can't help yourself. And I thought, what kind of thing is that for you to say? Through your own lips come the testimony that he was a good man and that he helped people. So why does he hang on a Roman cross today? I looked up at Jesus there squinting in the sunlight. The sweat pouring down his face and stinging his eyes. Trails of blood dripping into his matted beard and off of his chin, issuing forth from each embedded thorn from that merciless crown. Some of the soldiers followed suit. They followed the priest's lead. They took the purple robe. They came around and they knelt in front of the cross. Hail, Jesus, King of the Jews, thy wish is my command. Orders, sir. One of the robbers was going on loudly about how he wasn't a robber, he was a politician. Everyone laughed when Tertius said, well, maybe you should talk to Jesus about it. He's a king. But I was in no laughing mood. Then do you know what Jesus did? Jesus prayed. Oh, now listen, prayer is nothing new when you're on a cross. I've heard so many prayers from the kingdom. They pray for vengeance. They pray for strength. They pray for mercy. They pray for the pain to go away. They pray for it all to end. But not Jesus. Do you know what Jesus prayed for? He said, Father, forgive them. For they know not what they do. What does that mean? Forgive them. Was Jesus praying for me? Was he praying for his executioner? The one that pounded the nails into his flesh? How can he do that? Love. Perhaps that's what he meant when he talked about love. then something else happened. Something that I cannot explain. The sky began to get dark. Very dark. And the darker the sky became, the quieter the priest became. It was so weird. There were no clouds in the sky. But this darkness came. It was as though there were a veil, and the sun could just barely peek through. Some of you more ignorant begin to say it's an eclipse, but no, the sun was already in the western sky, and the moon comes up in the east. Some people in the crowd began to run back to the city. The women began to draw their shawls up around their faces. People were sort of forgetting about the cross, and they were looking around, when suddenly the earth began to shake. The entire mountain began to tremble. And then the storm clouds gathered quickly, and they completely blocked out the sun. And though it was only 12 in the afternoon, the moon was out, the stars were out. You could see it was completely dark outside. We jumped to our feet alarmed. Each legionary unsheathed his sword. There was a flash of lightning, and I looked over, and just momentarily I saw Jesus, his limp body hanging there on the cross. His lips were moving. He was praying to his Father. Oh, where were the taunts of the priests now? They were on their faces. They were beating their chests. They were beating the ground. Some were running back to the city. People were crying out. We all thought that this was God's retribution, that maybe we really had crucified the Son of God. I was afraid that Jesus was about to come down from the cross. There was no more cursing. The earthquake ripped a large fissure in the earth that came right across the top of Golgotha, went right down to the gate of the city, and went all the way to the city. They told me it went all the way to the temple. Large boulders were ripped from the surrounding mountains and came thundering down into the valley. Tombs were opened, and dead bodies were cast forth. Something different was happening. Something we did not understand. And then it stopped. And I looked up on the cross. And Jesus was dead. I said, turn and began to act weird. He was talking about the same thing we were all thinking and feeling. He's the only one that had the courage to say it. Maybe we had just crucified the Son of God. Oh, look at what this man has done to me. He's reduced me to a slobbering baby. Would you believe that right now, Tertius and 100 Roman soldiers are out guarding the dead man's tomb? That Pilate is dumber than a bag of hammers. What did they think, that he was going to come back to life again? No one that I ever crucified ever rose from the grave. Yet I wonder. And here I sit, all alone, in the third watch of the night, wondering if there really could be a God like that. And wondering if he's there, I think I could believe in a God like that. Demetrius.